Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for clicking on over. It means a lot that you guys keep clicking. If you guys keep clicking, I'll keep making. And today, we are going to rank the top 10 players in Survivor history. As the off season gets a little bit deeper, like right now, we're almost a quarter of the way through this off season. We have like another 3-ish months, and it's been about 3-ish weeks since the finale. So we are getting to a point now where we're deep into the off season. So I feel like these ranking videos should really help you guys get through this tough off season. Of course, we all love the show despite its shortcomings, and so it is tough to not see the show every single Wednesday. But until then, I think I'm gonna do a bunch of rankings. I think I'm gonna do. Well, you'll have to stick out. You'll have to stick to the end to find out what I'm gonna be talking about tomorrow, which is gonna have to do with 42. Some interesting information coming out of that season. But overall, I mean, I think it's time to shift gears now. We're now officially moving away from talking about and reflecting on 41 and now talking about either Survivor as a whole or Survivor 42. If you haven't already, join our Discord server. It's in the description. It's the top link. We have tons of fun. I ask you guys questions. Sometimes I'll just ask you, what do you think of Survivor? I'm actually asking a question in one of the channels about your most unpopular Survivor opinions. So if you want to be in a video, because I'm going to do a future video where I basically review your guys' unpopular Survivor opinions. So if you want to be in a video, submit one there. I think it's the one of the channels in the server. It's super chill. But overall, I want to use this further to interact with you guys and have you guys help me out in knowing what videos I should make or what you guys think about Survivor or the current season, things like that. I'm really going to start using that more. So hit the top link in the description. If you haven't already, subscribe. 73% of you guys who are watching these videos are not subscribed. Let's change that. It's easy and it's free. And if that's it, let's get right into this top 10 players in Survivor history. So before we start, a lot of people just start out their videos just immediately going into the ranking or talking about honorable mentions, which we will get to. But first, I want to talk about what I feel like warrants a good player, right? So I am going to be doing this ranking based off very specific things, right? So in increasing order of importance, at number 5 for things that I value in a Survivor player's game, and what I'm doing this specific list off of is at 5, physical challenges, 4, idle plays if applicable. So I'm not going to punish somebody if they had been a player before idols were either existing or as prevalent as they are nowadays. But 4 is idle plays, 3 social bonds, 2 big moves, and 1 overall dominance. So and by the way, that's in increasing order, meaning number 5 is the least important out of these 5. These are all very important to me, but number 5 is the least important and number 1 is the most important. So to repeat it, at 5, I have physical challenges, 4 idle plays, 3 social bonds, and 2 big moves, and 1 overall dominance. And so in that order are the most important things for me. And so obviously if a player has a lot of dominance and not a lot of the other things, that'll help them. But it's good if they have all of these, or especially the ones like up towards the more important side of it. So the dominance, big moves, social bonds. Whereas if a player just does idle plays and physical challenges, that's not as important to me as social bonds, big moves, and dominance is to me. So that's what I'm doing my ranking off of. So again, if you disagree with me, disagree with these terms of which I'm doing my list on. Don't disagree with my ranking, because I'm ranking things probably differently based off of what you're ranking. If you disagree, you're probably ranking based off different terms, and that's okay. But I just wanted to preface why I'm going to be ranking these people where they are. And so for each person, I do want to come back to this list of 5 things and talk about which ones apply to them and why they did end up making it on the list at the spot that they did. So before I get into the original list, here are my honorable mentions. So these are really I only have 3 or 4. I know I have 3 honorable mentions. These would have been my 11, 12, and 13 in no specific order. Wentworth is one that I had considered, and really it was her and my number 9 spot, kind of fighting for that spot. My number 10, as you'll see, is kind of an outlier, and basically my list starts at 9. 10 is just kind of someone who I felt like needed to be there, but they don't necessarily fit the criteria that I just talked about. And I will say Wentworth is definitely interchangeable with my number 9 pick. I just think that my number 9 pick had specific things that they needed to be above her, and so that's just my personal opinion, and I'll get to those when I get to my number 9 pick. Other person that I had considered is Tyson from Blood versus Water, from Tokenshiens, and from Heroes vs. Villains. For me, my big issue is his win in Blood versus Water is really good, and it competes with some of the wins from the people on the list that I do have. The issue is his Heroes vs. Villains and Tokenshin games are extremely flawed, obviously, especially his Heroes versus Villains games, where I think if he doesn't screw up that vote and Rob assumes the majority and votes out Russell there, you get a season where Rob and Tyson dominate, and I think Rob probably again mismanages the jury, or they blindside Rob before they get to the end and Tyson takes the cake because he's likable and he can win challenges that Rob couldn't blindside him. And so I do think that Tyson overall really screwed himself out of a pretty easy free, I don't know about a free win, but definitely a free, very, very good placement in that season, and he just completely ruined it by putting one vote in one spot. Completely idiotic, and it was completely unnecessary, and that's really what boots him out of this top 10. Although I will say I would have probably had him at like 12. So I would have had Wentworth at 11, Tyson at 12, and then Spencer is who I would have had because he has the same name as me. That's the only real reason why. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, Spencer plays two strategically complex and impressive games, really back to back. I mean, he plays them within a year of his season airing and a year of the filming of his second season, Cambodia. And so I do think that it's really, really impressive what he's able to do. The issue is he doesn't win the first one, and he really wasn't gonna win with Tony. I mean, his failure to convince people to blindside Tony, which is one of the most blindsidable people, Kageon Tony is one of the most blindsidable people in Survivor history, and yet people just did not have the social capital to flip his own alliance on him. He failed to out Tony to his own alliance and do it successfully, and I think that's really his major flaw. And then obviously in Cambodia, him going with Jeremy and just kind of getting led to the slaughter there is not really as impressive as the placement looks. He also gets 0 votes at the end. I think overall he's good sitting in like this top 15 player, but I do think that he is not like the player who's going to grow on me. I feel like as more players get added to this list as seasons go on, I feel like we're going to get Spencer just dropping and dropping and dropping, whereas there are some people in here who I could see staying at their spot forever, or even moving up if a player comes back and does worse and drops. I feel like Spencer will always be decreasing on this list until he's not even on here as an honorable mention anymore. But I do respect his 2 games, and he has the same name as me, so I have to give him mad respect. I mean, for God's sake, when you look up my name, Survivor Spencer, I'm the first person who comes up, and Spencer is the second one who comes up, so I have to give my brother some love. But the issue is that obviously with his first game being flawed in that he couldn't get the most obvious threat out in the history possibly ever of Survivor, and then his second game just kind of got led to the slaughter as a GOAT, I really can't respect that. And so those are my honorable mentions, people who did not make the list. As I said earlier, my list starts at number 9. Number 10, really, as I said earlier, they have to really apply to these 5 things, especially the ones that are towards the more important side of it, being, number 1, dominance, number 2, big moves, number 3, social bonds, number 4, idol plays, and then number 5, challenges. And I feel like this person really doesn't cover too many of those, but it's really out of their control, and also it's part of the reason why I had him at 10. I have Richard Hatch at 10. I think Richard Hatch to me is someone who he made the game what it is. So much of what we do nowadays comes from him. Obviously he's gone pretty nuts in like the past year, but I think overall still as a player, putting my personal opinions on his opinions aside, I feel like he made the game what it is. He had no blueprint. He didn't know what a challenge was going to be like. He couldn't go home and study what the game was going to be like. He couldn't go home with a plan. All he knew was that there was 3-day cycles. He knew the format of the show. He knew when they were going to merge, and he knew that they would have a jury. Everything else he had to learn on the way, and still was able to have such a dominant game strategically, and really was the only player playing on his entire season, and really creates the game of Survivor. He's the first person to really play Survivor. Even though he's technically tied 16 ways for the first 16 people to play Survivor, he's the person who really first played the game how it's even close to being played in the modern sense. He's the closest person who played the game in Borneo to someone nowadays who's playing the game super actively. I think Hatch did that, and so I would feel some sort of way if he didn't have a spot on the list. The issue is the other 9 people fill up these 5 things that I value so much better, and so obviously I can't have him at like 5 or 4, 3 or 2 or 1, but I think that he definitely earns a spot on this list just for what he's done for the show. And that's really why, like, Wentworth and my number 9 were fighting for the last spot, because Hatch, it really isn't gonna move for me. Like, I considered putting Wentworth at 10 and then bumping Hatch off and keeping my number 9, or bumping my number 9 up down to 10, bumping Hatch off and putting Wentworth at 9. But I think, like, the issue overall is I want Hatch to have this spot. I think he deserves it, and so that's why Hatch is sitting here at number 10. At number 9, I have Rob Cesternino, and let me explain my dilemma here, really, for like the people fighting for this really last spot of the list, because again, this is really like the end of the real list. Like, this is where the real list begins, and so this was the last spot that was up for grabs, and it was between Wentworth or Cesternino. And for me, I went with Cesternino purely because, right, I feel like they obviously Kelly's first game is an embarrassment, and it really cancels out her last game. Like, her first game and her last game, they cancel out to be average. So really what we're looking at is Rob's Amazon game and Kelly's Cambodia game. So I think they both lose at the end, and they go home only because they lose a challenge, right? Obviously, if they had won the challenge, it's a whole different story. Or even if other people had won the challenge, I think Matt takes Rob, and I don't know, but like, I feel like, and then also I don't know if Spencer or Tasha takes Kelly to the end. So I feel like it's weird. It's definitely a weird circumstance for me. And so I feel like but both of them had questionable ways to get to as far as people taking them, but both would have been in much better spots if they had won the challenge and would not have gone home. The issue is, I think Rob wins if he wins that challenge, or if somebody takes him to the end, anybody. Whereas in Kelly needs to be in a final 3 where it's her, Tasha, and Spencer, and even then she has a tough time beating Spencer. Whereas if Kelly goes to the end with Jeremy, so let's say Jeremy wins that challenge but decides not to vote off Kelly and instead votes off Spencer, I think Jeremy still wins, probably still in a unanimous vote, which is super impressive. And the fact that Kelly's losing 0 to 10 against somebody, even if she had gotten to the end, is not really a good look for her. Whereas with Rob, you can call it close, maybe a vote switches and he loses by 1 vote. But either way, losing by 1 vote, 3 to 4, is better than losing 10 to 0, which is what Kelly would have done to Jeremy. But here, I'll just go through this jury. Obviously, I think we can all agree that if Rob goes to the end against Matt, he wins pretty thoroughly. I think Matt may get maybe Butch, but even then, I think he probably wins, or I think Rob probably wins 7 to 0 there. But the more interesting one, which is Rob versus Jenna, let's just go through the jury. So I feel like Alex and Dave, the rocket scientist, are both locked Jenna votes. I think Butch, Dina, and Matthew, because now Matthew's on the jury, they're all locked Rob votes. I think. So Jenna also has Heidi's vote locked as well. I almost forgot just because it's so obvious. Obviously, Jenna has Heidi's vote locked up, and I think she probably pulls Alex's and Dave's as well, although those aren't as locked as the others are. But I feel like those 3 probably go with Jenna. And then with Rob, I think Dina respected Rob as a strategist. I think Butch and Matt were just kind of like on his tribe for longer and knew him more, and they were more loyal to Rob, so they vote for Rob there. And that really leaves Christy as the swing vote. A lot of people claim that Christy voted wrong, but let's and if that's the case, then obviously she didn't mean to vote for Jenna in reality, so she's obviously not going to vote for Jenna, in a vote where it's Rob versus Jenna. But let's say that, Christy, in the real vote that actually happened, voted for Jenna on purpose. I think that even if she voted for Jenna on purpose over Matt, she wouldn't vote for Jenna over Rob. I feel like she goes with Rob, especially because of her speech after she gets voted out, where she swears she's not gonna let them win. I think she went back on that because it was Matt at the end. But if she had a better option to go against Jenna, she would do it in a heartbeat. And I think Rob is that perfect option. So that's why I think Christy swings over. If you think Christy swings the other way, that's fine. I think our argument still works because that still puts Rob in a better spot to win over a Kelly Wentworth, who just simply does not win the game in any circumstances once Jeremy gets to that final four, really. At number 8, I have Sandra. I really don't want to spend a lot of time on Sandra because she's really boring and not really fun and isn't really like that amazing player. But she won the game twice. She obviously won. She obviously did it first before Tony did, and so I think that is something to look at. That's it, because her wins are not impressive. I think her Heroes versus her Pearl Islands win is definitely more impressive than her Heroes versus Villains win, and that's saying something because her Pearl Islands win is still probably a bottom 15 or 10 win, like overall, and I think that now puts her Heroes versus Villains win probably at a bottom 5 win, if not a bottom 10 win at best. I think her wins are not impressive at all, but the fact that she was able to do them first, twice and all that, then I feel like if I don't put Sandra here, person who won the game twice for the first time, it's kind of hard not to put the quote-unquote Queen Sandra here. So I'm kind of forced to put her here, although I don't really feel like putting her here, but my hand's kind of forced here just because her resume looks so good, but the way that she got her resume is not impressive at all. Her games are bad. I don't even want to spend time diving into both games because I think it's a waste of time. If you want to argue with me in the comments, I'm not going to answer, to be honest, because Sandra's not really fun to talk about. We can argue about my top 3 or top 4, top 5, but Sandra's not the person I want to talk about. She's just so boring. So I'm going to just let Sandra sit here at number 8 with no debate in my head. At number 7 here, I have Kim Spradlin. I had trouble putting Kim here. My issue is she did it once. She did it once. Her Winners at War game really doesn't bring my opinion up on her or down on her. I feel like that game just wasn't really set up for her to win. I think her trying to call out Tony was impressive, but then obviously her failing kind of negates that. So I'm not going to really factor in her Winners at War game at all. I'm really looking at the fact that she has one. Probably in my personal opinion, probably the most dominant win of all time in Survivor history, unless I change my mind. But I feel like overall, I would say that for now. But the issue is she does it once. She plays once. And then when she comes back, she can't even come close to replicating it. Whereas there's people on here who have replicated games that are at least a shell of what they did the first time, or, their first game was close to what they did the second time, vice versa. For me, she's only able to do it once, whereas there's people who have been able to do it, come back with big targets and then do it again. And there's several examples of people who are ahead of her. In fact, hold on, give me a second. 1, 2, 3, 4 people ahead of her right now who I feel like played a great game and then came back with the target and then played an even better, or not even better, but at least a game that was at least a shell of that game, or at least close to it, pretty close, nearly as good. Whereas when Kim just came back and was meh, and that's why she can't really break this top 5, top 6, just because she has one very, very good win against a pretty bad cast, one, but I'm not really going to harp on that because it was such a good win. My main issue isn't with the level of the cast, it's the fact that she was able to do it against 1, that cast, and 2, just that cast. I don't know. To me, she was put in a good spot. I think her win's super impressive. But the fact that she was only able to do it once and then came back and was not able to even come close to that performance just shows me some things about her as a player that I think aren't top 5 worthy. That's just my personal opinion. And at number 6, I have Boston Rob. I think Boston Rob, I know he's so divisive. If you don't put him at 1, then you're being a Boston Rob hater to, Boston Rob stands. But then if you don't put him at negative 14 to all of the people on Reddit, then they think you're being a Boston Rob fanboy. So you really can't win with these crazy people. Hopefully you're a normal person like me, and you just have Boston Rob in your top 10, but not in your top 5 or 3 or 2 or something. I think Boston Rob is a player who obviously, all of the common talking points against him, he had to play 4 times to win, and he had to get a cookie cutter easy cast to win against. I will say, though, he played good games before he won. His game even in Marquesas is very impressive for the time that he was in and for the situation that he was in. I think his downfall in Marquesas is his overall naive, young, aggressive personality, because Kathy is able to convince them to flip in a more calm way, whereas Rob is so abrasive that John Carroll is able to make Rob like a public figure, public enemy number 1. And I feel like he just wasn't at a time in his life when he could be calm enough and have a clear enough head to understand that that's not the way that you're going to change the game. And Kathy was just at a time where she did know that how to get to Pascal and Nalia's head and how to let them know that they were on the bottom of that road 2 group. And so that's just how I personally feel. And then obviously his All-Stars game I think is fantastic. I think it's probably like a top 2 or 3 runner-up game. I think there's a few that are closer. I think, aside from like your Doms or, you could argue Russell from Samoa, aside from these people's games, I mean, Rob's game in All-Stars was, it was just so good. It was so good. Aside from what, he really mismanages 3 jury votes. That means that if he had just only mismanaged 2 of them, if he had mismanaged 66.7% of his up for grab jury votes, he wins the game. That's so impressive. He's that close to a win there. And so people who use the argument of, well, it took him 18 trillion times to win the game. Yeah, but in the meantime, while he was not winning, he was playing very good Survivor. Even in the seasons where he gets voted out pre-merge, I think he does better than we expect. I think obviously in Heroes vs. Villains, up until that point, he is the most iconic person in the entire series history, not named Richard Hatch, and that's only because Richard Hatch played in the first season. I think he is like the most renowned best player up until that point, really. Obviously, Russell kind of takes that crown after, like, as the season airs, but before, Heroes versus Villains airs, I feel like you're looking at a Survivor landscape that is centered around Boston Rob, and even after, with Redemption Island. But I feel like overall, the fact that Rob was able to come in with that target and still assume the majority, and if Tyson's not an idiot, and then if Coach and Jarrett don't flip on him, he assumes control and probably gets far to the end and probably be either blindsided or he loses to a bitter jury. The fact that he's able to do that is super duper impressive to me personally. And then his other early boot kind of game in Winners at War, the fact that he's not the first boot in that season is absolutely impressive. He's able to make it to episode 5, is it? Like 4? Like, he's the 5th boot, I think. So I think he's episode 4 or 5, which is super impressive in my personal opinion. I think the fact that he wasn't the first boot is already already raises my opinion on him. I think without his Winners at War game, he probably is like down a spot. I think he's probably at 7, but just based off the fact that he was able to maintain and not get voted out first or second or third on his individual tribe is super impressive. And it took a bad swap screw to get him out, which again, also very, very impressive. So that's just my personal opinion about Rob overall. All right, we're in our top 5, and this is where I want to transition to start to talk about my 5 pillars and why, and where these players apply to those pillars. So at 5, I have Russell Hantz. I think Russell Hantz, to me, I don't think he really deserved to win Heroes vs. Villains, but I think he definitely deserved to win Samoa. I think it really doesn't matter, because I feel like the reason why he's not at 2 or 3 or 1 is only because he didn't win. I think even in spite of not winning, he played such again, my pillars. Let's start with least important. Physical challenges, amazing. He beats out the Wonder Boy Brett at the end of Samoa and is able to give himself at least a fighting chance there to then get obviously heartbroken and lose to Natalie. And then on top of that, in the pre-merge of Samoa, he's able to kind of put himself as the ox of the tribe, where they're not going to vote out him because he's such a vital part of their tribe. He does not care about getting rained on. He was the most tough against the elements in that season. And then Heroes vs. Villains, obviously he helps. I mean, his tribe wins the majority of the challenges pre-merge before eventually his tribe starts losing in those last, I think 3 rounds, where Rob goes and then Coach goes and then Courtney goes. But the first 5 challenges, I think the Heroes had won or had lost 4 of them. Russell was a huge part of that. And I think overall, I believe Russell wins final immunity, I think, at Final 4 in Heroes vs. Villains. If not, it was Parvati. But I think overall, Russell has proven that he's decent at these physical challenges. 4, idol plays. Come on. Come on. I mean, do I even need to talk about it? The Kelly idol play, him giving his idol to Parvati and having her play it, at the merge. Again, these fantastic idol plays. He's finding idols. I mean, he's the first person to find idols without clues, which I think is super impressive. I mean, idol plays is definitely covered here. Social bonds. He's able to connect the 4 who don't disband, don't try and flip on each other at all, and they're all very different people, and yet he connects them and keeps them together, even when it seems like they're all going to get pagong. They're all willing to get pagong because they're all so close to each other, including Russell, who's kind of like the focal point of that 4, and it shows because even when he gets down to that 4 and the 5, Mick and Natalie are willing to flip on Jason, and then Natalie's willing to flip on Mick. If it was a final 2, I think Natalie takes Russell to the end, and it just shows that Russell was the glue to the 4, and I don't even think it was close. I think Jason, Nick, and Natalie were all the closest connected. There we go. That's actual English to Russell. I think maybe Jason and Mick were closer to each other, but besides that, they all had very close bonds to Russell in this situation. And so I do feel like it does show his ability to create these close social bonds and these number 1 allies. Then you see him, Danielle, and Parvati. He's able to keep those 2 girls loyal to him. Even when they're all about to lose the game, if it weren't for a fluke Tyson vote, they're all still willing to go home for him. Obviously, he plays the idol, he gets kind of lucky there, but in the end, he's able to create those bonds so that, because if those girls, if Parvati votes for Russell there in that split vote, the whole plan doesn't work, and Parvati saves herself there, but she loses her ally. But because she cares about Russell as an ally and as a player in the game enough, her and Danielle stick with him through thick and thin, and they all make it towards the end. And then obviously Russell blindsiding Danielle, which was honestly a smart move on his part. But I think overall, Russell definitely has that for sure. 2 big moves, again, his idol plays, and then him. I think the best example is him flipping John Fincher at the final 10 and then voting out John Fincher at the final 9. That's, to me, is so cold-blooded, and it shows his capability to make gigantic moves. And then his dominance. I mean, he was the most dominant person in both of his seasons, and it really wasn't even close. And so if we're looking at my 5 pillars, Russell definitely deserves, honestly, top 3. The issue is he doesn't win. Spoiler alert, the top 4 people all win the game, and they really all come in close to win twice, or actually win twice. So I don't know, I feel like all of these people who are ahead of Russell, maybe not number 4 comes close to winning twice, but they all win, and most of them come close to winning twice, and Russell comes close to winning twice, I guess, but really once. And the other one was just him kind of managing the jury extremely, extremely poorly. At number 4, I have Jeremy. I think Jeremy plays a very, very great game in second chances on a season with very, very good players. A season that is so high caliber, he's able to dominate with revolutionary strategy that just hasn't even been seen yet to that point. Number 5, physical challenges. Jeremy definitely fits that. I mean, he's not the biggest challenge piece, but he almost plays it down, and he's able to combat that with his meat shield strategy, which I think works out for him in the end, definitely. Number 4, idol plays. I mean, obviously he plays an idol correctly for Fishback, and I think overall, I mean, I don't know. I mean, he's not the best with idols, but I think overall he's shown that he can use idols and that he really doesn't need to use idols, which is also pretty impressive. I just think overall, Jeremy is definitely someone who, like, he has shown his ability to both do physical challenges and idol plays. Number three, social bonds. Obviously, Spencer and Tasha being loyal to him to the end. No one ever talks about blindsiding him, and then he drags those two to the end and then beats them 10-0. That's a great example of social bonds in the game. Number two, big moves. Obviously, all of the blindsides in Cambodia that he was on the right side of. I mean, it just shows like he is a great player. I mean, and then on top of that, him being able to stay alive in Winners at War for so long, again, great stuff. And then number one, dominance. I feel like this is really what puts Jeremy so high up. Like, without dominance being my number one pillar, I think Jeremy could slip all the way down to like 7 or 8. But because dominance is my number one thing, Jeremy was so dominant on second chances. Like, he may not have been the best socializer or the best strategist or the best physical player, but he was the most dominant person on that season, and that season had such a good cast and such a high caliber cast that I think it's really impressive, and he definitely deserves the credit that he gets as being one of the best players of all time. At number three, I have Sarah Lacina. I feel like Sarah, to me, is someone who plays. Obviously, her first game is definitely her worst. And I think that's really what keeps her from being in these top two spots, right? But I think that Sarah's game overall is in Game Changers is such a dominant win, and again against a very good cast, just like Jeremy, right? She plays against not like these small cupcake easy casts, or even like a heroes versus villains cast, which is like a medium caliber returning cast as far as strategy goes, with the hero tribe being very strategically lacking, I guess you could say. Or like on All Stars, again, kind of strategically meh season. Or like I'm trying to think, like Caramoan, a very strategically strategical season, as far as the people that were on the season. I think the issue, with all of those seasons is that the strategical level of the cast is just, it's so far behind these seasons that we're talking about now, and the winners of these respective seasons. Sarah being a perfect example, Jeremy being a perfect example. These two have won very hard seasons with very high caliber casts. I mean, Game Changers has, I think you could argue, just as good of a cast as far as strategical caliber as Second Chances does. Obviously, it's a tough one to make, but you could make that argument, right? And I feel like Sarah's win is maybe a little less as impressive as Jeremy's is. What moves Sarah above Jeremy is the fact that, okay, obviously Sarah's and Jeremy's games, their first games kind of cancel. I mean, like they're both pretty meh, so they can cancel each other out. So now, and obviously their wins, I've admitted that Jeremy's was slightly better than Sarah's, but then when they return for Winners at War, Sarah plays a much better game than Jeremy does, and so that to me boosts Sarah above Jeremy for me. Like, I feel like Sarah, plays a little worse game in her winning season versus Jeremy's winning season, but then she plays a much better game in her returning season, and that overall puts her a sliver above Jeremy. And so that's why Sarah ends up here. Obviously 5 at physical challenges, she's okay at. 4 idle plays, again, nah. But then 3 social bonds, the one of, if not the best player ever with social bonds. 2 big moves, decent, and then 1 dominance. I mean, she dominates her season in Game Changers, and then she also dominates again in Winners at War alongside Tony. And so I think Sarah definitely deserves this top 3 spot, just because she was able to play 2 very good games. And if you're able to play 1 winning dominant game and then play another game that was very close to being as good as your last one, you deserve to be in this top like 6 or 7 area. That's just my personal opinion. And at number 2, I have Parvati Shallow. I think Parvati, to me, again, another example of someone who was able to play a great game and then come back and play almost as good of a game as she did the first time. Again, well, really, it's the second time. Obviously, we're not counting her Cook Islands game, which I think is a little bit underrated, because if the Raro tribe gains control at the merge, if Penner doesn't flip, obviously the I2s goes out, and then after that, Penner goes out. And that puts her in a spot where it's her, Nate, Adam, and Candace at the end, where I think it's interesting. It's an interesting spot where I do think that Nate beats her at the end, and I think Adam has a good shot to beat her. But that at least puts her in a second place spot. Like that's somewhat impressive. So people who brush off her, Cook Island's game as, oh well, that's what makes her a bad player, are silly, obviously. And then her Micronesia game, obviously, I think it's definitely her best game. She wins the game here, obviously. She's able to go to the end against Amanda, a very good player, obviously, a player who has made it to the end before, and beat Amanda. I think she creates the Black Widow Brigade in the season and is able to really take control and have several paths to the end and picks the one that's best for her game based off jury votes. She manages the jury correctly, maybe aside from James. And I think overall, I think Parvati plays this season pretty well. And then obviously with Parvati's heroes versus villains game, she comes back with such a gigantic target, and I think that's the most impressive thing. And that's really, Parvati and obviously our number one. If you haven't kind of realized that the person already, both of these people came back with gigantic targets on their back, and their third seasons are really their like second real season of actually playing the game hard, but their third seasons, and just absolutely played their tails off, both of them. And I think Parvati just shows like you can come in with any level of target on your back, and if you align with the right people, and if and I think really the issue with Parvati and what puts her below the person who's at number one is the person who's at number one actively diminish their target level and their threat level by doing things within their control and out of their control. Whereas in Parvati did not try and diminish her target level. In fact, she actually played up the flirting and all of that stuff, but she was able to find Russell, and which, to her credit, helps her get farther in the game. But I will say overall that Parvati is able to overcome her threat level, whereas in the person that number one is able to make their threat level completely disappear based off of their gameplay and their social, bonds and things like that. And the person at number one for me is Tony Vlachos. You knew who it was going to be. It's pretty obvious. I mean, he's played you can make a really, really good argument that his Kagiyan and his Winners at War game are the two best games ever. Like out of the like thousands of games that people have, or I don't know about thousands, but out of the 700 games that people have played, if you count every single person, every single time that they've been back, you're looking at a lot of games. And I think you could make the argument that Tony's two games are the best two games of all time. Obviously, it's a tough one to make, but I think you could definitely make the argument that one of them is at least at the top. I think Tony plays, obviously in Kagiyan, plays a great game, flipping back and forth, and is able to convince a group of people who know that Tony's flipping and that Tony is a flipper, that he's not going to flip again, and then does it again, and then comes back and then makes them feel good about, still sticking with him, and is able to push this persona and be so outright with this Tony craziness that people start just like ignoring Tony and being like, oh, well, that's just Tony, right? And it actually works for him. And the people who are actively trying to point this facade that he's putting out in this control that he has over the game and his flipping ability, the people who are trying to point it out, in Spencer and Tasha, who are on the bottom, nobody listens to them because they're also, they're also hushed by Tony. Tony has, the wool just over everybody's head in that season, and it shows because the people who don't have wool over their heads go home, and they go home trying to convince everybody that they're wrong, but everybody's just like, what are you talking about? Until those people also get flipped on by Tony. And I think it's very impressive. And I think also, in my personal opinion, Tony pulls off the best move in Survivor history in flipping Woo. I think flipping Woo there is the just bare bones. I think it shows. You don't need the idols, you don't need the challenges, you don't need the Parvati votes. Him somehow convincing a man to give up a free $1 million, to me, is the most blatantly amazing move in Survivor history, and I really don't think it's that really close, to be honest. I think it's just so impressive. And then obviously with his Winners at War game, I should mention he comes back for Game Changers. He said in interviews that as soon as he walked in, he realized he had no chance, and then just tried to go crazy, and just I really don't think he was trying that hard on Game Changers, so I'll kind of give him a pass there. And then his Winners at War game, he comes back. He has probably like the third biggest target. Maybe fourth. I think Boston Rob has a bigger target. I think that Parvati has a bigger target. I don't know if Sandra has a bigger target, but she probably does by a little bit. So let's say he has the fourth biggest target threat or threat level on him in a winners at war season. He's Tony Vlachos. Like he is the guy from Kagian. Like it's ridiculous. And the fact that he's able to deflect that and make it actively disappear through his own working. Parvati, she just kind of gets around it by brute force, by just going with Russell, and like everyone knows who she is, and everyone still thinks that she's that person. But the difference is that that she obviously finds Russell, which helps her. Whereas in Tony, everyone thinks they know who he is, and then he actively changes that perception through his behavior and his behavior only, which I think is super impressive. He also obviously dominates the game in really all three aspects: socially, strategically, and physically as well, winning all of these challenges. With 5 challenges, obviously he's great. 4 idle plays, come on, it's Tony. Obviously, leveraging that fake idol in Kagian, I think, was game-changing to me. 3 social bonds. I think him and Sarah is a perfect example of him creating these social bonds that are like really, really tight-knit. And then also in Kagian, his alliance that kept coming back to him is also a really good example of that. 2 big moves. I mean, come on. His 4-3-2-1 vote in Winners at War, his LJ blindside in Kagian, his Jeffra blindside in Kagian. I think it's really, really impressive what he's able to do. And then obviously dominance. I think it goes without saying that he has maintained control over those 2 seasons, and he was always the best player on those 2 seasons, and it really wasn't ever close. I think maybe you can make the argument that Sophie was playing better until Tony blindsided Sophie, but then Tony blindsided Sophie in Winners at War. So I think overall dominance is definitely something that he showed in both of those seasons. And that's it, guys. I just wanted to go through my top 10 players of all time and just look back, obviously, as we look forward to 42. My next video will be on why I feel like 42 is kind of set up to do bad. Like, I feel like 42 almost has no chance in a way, and I'll tell you guys why tomorrow. I think there's some very specific reasons why. If you haven't already, like, subscribe, share, do all that good stuff. Without you guys, I am just a weird guy speaking into a weird microphone. If that's it, I'll talk to you guys in the next one.